Hello and welcome all to the Middle-earth In Mercia Podcast. Episode 8, The Voice of Saruman. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Sunny, and this is the Middle-earth In Mercia Podcast. Now, today's episode hopefully has a little bit of something for everyone, because this is going to be a bit of a roundup, really, a closeout for Season 1. Yes, you have made it this far. The podcast is it's a year old since inception, really. And yeah, so we'll call it 1 year old. This is our 1 year anniversary from conception of the idea. And yeah, we have finally made it to the end of Season 1. So it's going to be a bit of a roundup of all things, really. We're also going to be trying out a couple of new things, as you may have noticed, and the name of the episode title may have hinted at. I have a new mic, and this is sort of a bit of an effort to increase the audio quality without having to spend so much time editing as I have done in the past, because I have realised over the course of the year that I really enjoy doing the podcast. I really enjoy doing sort of the hobby interviews, and I definitely enjoy going to the events, but one thing I do not enjoy is any time sat at the editing suite. So yeah, I've made this sort of a bit of an investment in this hobby of mine of podcasting to try and decrease that time. And yeah, I'm also going to sort of try a new style of recording and editing, which isn't really going to affect you, but maybe you'll notice a difference just to try and reduce that amount of time. So this is sort of a trial run for how I'm going to do things in Season 2. But on to the content of the episode. So we've got a very small bit of long overdue correspondence that we're going to go through shortly. Then I'm going to give you a rather large hobby update, what myself and the guys have been getting up to. And that will sort of really lead us onto the trail of where we're heading for the whole of 2023. Then another very long overdue feature. I'm going to take you through my experience of Ardacon Singles. And yeah, that's going to be fairly brief for a tournament, because I think in my doubles coverage, I rather comprehensively went through sort of an in-depth review of Ardacon. So I'm just going to focus on my army and the games, really. And then to close out, we are going to catch up on the latest news surrounding the hobby. There has been a rather spicy update concerning the Middle-earth strategy battle game over on Warhammer Community just this week. And then to finish up the episode, we are going to discuss the future and Season 2, and perhaps I will allude to what the aim of Season 2 is going to be, because you may recall that the aim, I did touch on this a little bit, so perhaps it's not as much of a teaser. Last episode I definitely touched on it, but you may recall that the aim of this season was to go from total novice, never been to a tournament of any kind, to going to the biggest tournament in the world for Middle-earth strategy battle game, and that was Ardacon. And obviously all I really needed to do was buy a ticket and turn up for that one. So we've got a slightly more ambitious target for this year, which I think you'll enjoy. I think if you're starting off with this podcast as a novice like I was, that, hopefully this becomes a bit of a story of, year 1, year 2, year 3 in the tournament scene. That's what I'm thinking at the moment. But I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. So on to the features of the podcast this week. So in the correspondence slot this week, really it's just filling you in on a brief email exchange I had in sort of late September, which was a rather long time ago. But I just I was so busy with how big the last episode was, I didn't quite manage to find the memory space to fit it in. But I did want to mention it because it's something I've enjoyed. So really, today's correspondence slot is just going to be used to shout out a couple of other hobby content creators that I've been particularly enjoying of late. So this first one I obviously found quite some time ago because the correspondence was from September, but it was quite nice of them to reply to me. So yeah, I wanted to give a bit of a shout out, although I'm probably, shouting up to them really. I don't think they need the exposure. I think their podcast is doing quite well, but I have been enjoying it. And yeah, I wrote to Albert and Geordie over at the Two Towers podcast, which they're doing a very similar thing to sort of the to Entmoot in the UK that Harry does. Similar in style, but there's two of them, so it's a bit more banterish. It gives them other options that like people like myself and Harry, who are more doing it primarily alone day to day, don't have, and that creates a unique dynamic. So they do offer something different to the Entmoot podcast. It is its own thing. And I just wrote to them and said, this hello from one podcast to another. I've really been enjoying their episodes. I particularly enjoyed episode 10 was what I wrote to them about it was a chap who was doing his first tournament, and they were hosting their first tournament, and I haven't actually seen anybody do something like that. This is what it was like hosting my first tournament, so I really enjoyed that. And yeah, go listen to episode 10. It was really good. And they were very kind and wrote back that they enjoyed the format we've got going on over here. I do my best to actually offer a format. Mileage may vary on how much I've actually managed to stick to that, but we'll see. I'm looking to try and make sure I'm a little bit better at sticking to my own format in season 2. But yeah, they just said they had enjoyed the format, what I was doing, and that they liked how honest I was being. And that was really good feedback to hear from them, really, because honesty, I think, is something I want to offer here. I understand that, there is a genuine possibility, as when anyone is totally honest, that you're probably going to upset a few people. So not everybody is going to be my greatest fan, but, that's what I wanted to do a little bit different here. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully mostly good, and I hope you agree. But anyway, yeah, go check out the Two Towers podcast. I forgot to mention, it's based in Australia, so also you get a little bit of a view what the tournament scene is like over there. And I always find that particularly interesting because each country, continent has its own sub-meta, really. Now on to the other bit of hobby content that I wanted to mention, and this definitely isn't really a shout out because they are taking off like a rocket ship, but is more a solid recommendation for any of my listeners of something I've really, really been enjoying, which is the painting phase over on YouTube, and also they do a weekly podcast which is available on Spotify and all other good podcast formats, which is hosted by a couple of guys. I'm sorry I can't recall their names, but they essentially started up the channel. It is a videographer and then basically a hobbyist, and they are both very good. They've got some good chat on them, and I do enjoy listening to them. But sort of the face, as it were, that has really started bringing in numbers and caused the channel to take off like a rocket ship is Peachy, formerly of sort of the video tutorials on Games Workshop, and used to be a army painter over there. And I've really been finding their content absolutely enthralling, to be honest. They are my number one podcast on a weekly basis. Just really good chat from the three guys, and they're because two of them used to work for Games Workshop. During that weekly podcast, they really sort of delve into a little bit of the history of Games Workshop, how things are seen inside, and some of the decisions they've seen made. And Peachy particularly, I think he said that he had worked at the company for a little over 20 years or a little under 20 years. So he's really seen it develop from a bit of a big fish in the hobby world, but in terms of businesses, a bit of a minnow into a real large corporation that is making some serious money. So if you've ever wondered, why did I think like that, it's definitely something to check out. And then also, for me anyway, and my friends, which I'll get onto in the hobby section, I'm finding their tutorials absolutely spot on. They are right in sort of the target zone of where I'm aiming for my painting, really, at the moment. When I got back in to the hobby in a serious manner, I think it was about 6 years ago, I started picking it up, and I was doing a little bit here and there. But it was about 3 years ago, maybe. 3 years ago, because it was around the time I had my motorcycle crash, but that is a story for another time. It was about that time that I seriously got back into things, and at that point I was like, I can't remember how to paint, and I just really spent about a year and a half doing my absolute best to get as good as I could at painting, and really relearnt the process, learnt a lot of the techniques that had sort of developed over the 20 years since I had originally got in the hobby, because it was a very different style of painting, at least for novices anyway, back then. Really got up to a stage where I was like sort of spending about 6 hours on every Space Marine, which just isn't, it's great if you want a centerpiece kill team, but isn't really manageable for an army force. And then having got into the Lord of the Rings and playing tournaments over the last year, I've really shifted into, what is the highest quality I can get for the minimum effort I can get. And I think, for instance, like I've got some models that, they look a great tabletop quality, and I've only spent, because I've batch painted them, I've only spent 30 minutes a model, which is, really manageable to churn out a good tabletop ready army that looks good. Anyway, back to the original point. That is the exact sort of painting schemes that Peachy is doing on the painting phase on YouTube. And even if he's perhaps, not doing a model you're interested in, there's a lot of 40k stuff, not going to lie. I haven't seen any Middle-earth content on there. It does give you ideas of, oh yeah, that is a different way I could do leather that looks 90% as good as how I'm currently doing it, but is done in half the time. There's a lot of things like that. I'm not going to go into it too much because this is a Middle-earth podcast, but I recently have got into Kill Team, and I used his method that he did for the Necrons from the Kill Team box, and I got them done in a week. Awesome tips. Really recommend it. Absolutely 10 out of 10. Their production is fantastic. It's just all top notch. Go and check it out if you're looking for some new hobby content. As I say, it's not Lord of the Rings specific, but I do think that a few of them have a vague interest in it. So maybe we'll see some in future, but just, general hobby, can't recommend it enough. If you have anything you feel you'd like to chat to us about, then please do write in to the podcast at middleearthinmercia@gmail.com. That's middleearthinmercia@gmail.com. Alternatively, you could drop us a message on our Facebook page. Now it's time for a hobby update, and this hobby update is going to be a bit of a year in review, really, as it's the end of the season. I'm going to be catching you up on where Tom and Ash have got to as well, because obviously sort of their story has been a regular part of the podcast. I find it, I hope you will find it interesting too, but I personally find it interesting, just having those sort of conversations I would have with them naturally, but checking in on how they're finding things, because I think the pair of them, maybe it's 6-9 months behind me and sort of this story of really getting into the Middle-earth strategy battle game in terms of being a tournament player. And yeah, they're just that one step behind. And I'm quite strong in my convictions, and it's quite interesting for me to find how people that are outside of like my mindset, how they're finding things. I know obviously there will be similarities because we're all friends, but like Tom, for instance, me and him quite often approach things in a slightly different manner. And then Ash, he has, I think, probably the most interesting outlook of all, because although he did a bit of model painting when he was younger, he's not really ever been as immersed in sort of wargaming as me and Tom. So this isn't just like, a big step into Middle-earth. This is a big step into wargaming for him. I've rambled a little bit there, but moving forward with this new equipment I've got, it should be much easier to have one-on-one chats with each other, or maybe even like two-on-one chats, and go through with them in person, and it'd be much easier to edit. So for season 2, I'm hoping to get them in the office and talk about their hobby updates more in person. Maybe we can do another. We could do another battle report. I quite enjoyed that, and I learned a lot of things from doing it the first time. On to the hobby update. So, as my regular listeners will be aware, I've obviously been focusing on Harad, and that's really been sort of the story of the last year. And me and Chris selected them way back when we were originally planning for the Warhammer World doubles, both really for theme. Cool theme with the sort of Middle Eastern / North African sort of merging of Berber and a few other cultures, and quite a few different ways to play them. Really hard hitting but low defense, in some ways quite fast moving. Yeah, just a really interesting army that we decided to go with, that neither of us had ever touched before. So that was sort of the motivation behind it in brief. And yeah, I've been working on those really since February last year, starting with no models. And I've probably got about 800 points of Harad fully painted up over that year. I've got 6 Ardacon Guard. I've got 3 Watchers of Kana. Always forget what they're called. So many Haradin warriors, which I've added extra bows and spears on. Most of them have bow and spear, but I've got a few here and there for bows and just spears for those options when you're trying to make sure you're maxing out the points. Really got quite, considering it's only been a year, I've really got quite well, for me anyway, I've got quite a large force, that really has been a year in development. I've done so many of the Haradin warriors that what I actually decided was, well, first off, I decided for my main warriors, the ones that I sort of envisioned that Harad is it's a diverse realm. It's a dispersed realm that, in sort of a place that is described as being so hot, and not necessarily a humid hot, but a dry hot, perhaps water is scarce, that there's not going to be too many towns and villages that are really large. So I imagined them being sort of ruled by all these different chieftains and warlords spread out across the land, and they're all ruled by this overlord, Suladan, who's the mightiest of them all. He's managed to assemble the finest warriors, and he rules. He's the king of kings. That's how I imagine my sort of Harad. And I thought, with the sort of lists I've been working on, I'm going to have loads of these Haradin warriors. Because as you've seen in my list reviews, that's kind of what I've really gone for with the majority of my list. So I thought, I don't want them all to be just one colour. So I sort of came up with the king's colours, Suladan's colours, how his men were dressed, and I've done them much more richly. And I didn't really like in Lord of the Rings the inclusion of the black in the clothing. In the books, I don't think it is mentioned that they wear black. It's mentioned that they wear sort of purple, magenta, red, and specifically that they have red cloth tied to the end of, I believe, either their bows or arrows, but definitely their spear tips. So I thought, that did sort of work for the films, but I want to take out the black. So we're going to focus. I did a really sort of royal purple and a really bright, vibrant red as the main and then I've also mixed in is sort of a pinky colour for sort of minor detailings. Didn't use that as much. So yeah, these really rich colours to sort of really show, Suladan's men can afford these fine inks that have perhaps come from abroad. His men are wearing gold. And then I've sort of, I did two other sort of minor kingdoms. So I had one that I imagined was marshalled by my chieftain. And he was sort of like a bit lower down. So he was using silvers and bronzes for the metalwork. And they did have, so his main colour was purple, I believe. And actually on those models, I did something a little different. And I over the last year, I've picked up an airbrush. And with them, I did some specific, like, before I went in and did detailing, I specifically undershadowed with the airbrush. So I did sort of a bluey purple from below and then a brighter purple from above. And then I went in and did my usual shading and then edge highlighting. And it worked really well on them. And to be honest, achieved a much higher contrast with a lot less work than some of the other models. Wasn't quite as clean as, say, the ones I did for Suladan. But I was quite happy with that. And then I did another one, which was for my Haradim King. And I sort of imagined, this chap, he's got a bigger kingdom, but they're much poorer. They can't afford these inks, and he's got more men to equip. So for him, I did sort of lots of browns and blacks, just more neutral, natural colours that maybe looked more like natural fibres. So I had these sort of three different sets. That really added some variety to the painting as well. I think I'll have to count them up at some point, how many painted Haradim warriors I've got. But I think it's in the round somewhere between 30 and 40. There's quite a lot of them. And I think it's probably closer to 40. But if I had to paint that many, all the same scheme, I think I would have got bored. And each one allowed me to sort of experiment a little bit. Because I told you, Suladan's men I did in that sort of traditional painting. Then I did the airbrush work on the chieftain's men. And then for the king, actually, I used as many contrast paints as I could to try and speed them up. There was, with the contrast, you really do find that some of them work exactly how you've intended and it looks spot on. And then others, it's just like, no, this isn't going to work, or you need to do some traditional highlights over the top. So I would really recommend delving into the contrast range. But don't just get a model, slap it on there, and then decide whether contrast works for you or not. I think you need to experiment across the colours. And it is a bit frustrating because they are expensive per pot. So that can be an expensive experiment. Definitely one thing that can help is there's lots of YouTubers that have done various experiments with the different ones and really gone in depth. And you can get quite a good idea from that. But failing that, talk to your friends, see what they've used. I've got a few tips of what some of the guys have done. Just said, that model looks good. What have you used on that? But so that is really quite in depth on what I've done on the hobby wise. So that's focusing on Harad. What else have I been doing? So in the background, when they first came back in, I put in, well, for me anyway, it was a big order of Far Harad. I got something like four camels, king on camel, and the Mahud Warriors set. I already had some half trolls, but we'll get on to that in a bit. And yeah, I've painted them up in the background. Most of the Mahud Warriors are done. I'm about halfway through doing the Camel Riders, and then I'm going to do the King last, because I want to get all the experience from the other ones. And I've been using mainly contrast paints on them. I've really found those models to really take to that. And I know some people have different ways of referring to it, but I've been using the slap chop method, I think is how it's most widely known on that, which isn't exactly revolutionary, but the way I do it is spray the model black, then from the top use an airbrush or a spray can to do a light grey, not near white, not like an off-white, but a light grey. It's a solid grey, it's not dark, all over the top, not spraying from the bottom at all. You don't go above sort of dead level on the model. You need all the recesses to still be black. Allow that to dry, and then dry brush the whole thing in the brightest white you've got, and then apply the contrast. And for these Mahud Warriors, I've been finding that has worked excellently. I do go in and still, if you've had some pooling or something like that, as you do with some of the contrast paints, I've been going in and touching that up a bit. But to be honest, I've for my scheme anyway, I've found the contrast to be absolutely amazing, and I've really done them quickly, which is how I've sort of been able to prepare them in the background while I wasn't necessarily using them for tournaments. They weren't, on my list of must-haves, and I've managed to get that done in the spare time of my spare time, if you follow. So that is another bit, like reasonably sized contingent that are fairly painted. And then the other contingent that I painted over the years, as you'd be aware, I took a Mordor force to Ardacon Singles. And that was made, well, I've painted quite a few Mordor heroes that I've not used in tournaments. So to give you a complete list of Mordor heroes, I converted and made a Morannon Orc drummer. I've got Razdush, who's totally painted. I've got Gothmog, who's totally painted. I've got Gorbag, who is totally painted. Then I've also got Goroth, who's totally painted. And as you'll notice, two of them are sort of Forge World packs. So I've got Zagdush and I've got Musgar sitting on the painting slate. They're both sort of undercoated and slap chopped, ready to go for contrast and traditional paint. I think I got all those names right. So you have to forgive me if there's a slight mispronunciation or I've done some repetition there. There's a lot of gushes these days in the Mordor names. But yeah, and out of them, Goroth, I've also forgotten Kardouche Firecooler, who was someone I'd had sitting from the Made to Order in my pile for a really long time. I did him for Ardacon. And yeah, out of them, Goroth and Razgush were absolute delights to paint. Really, really enjoyed those models. They brought out Razgush, and I was like, I have to have this. This is such a cool orc. It's such a cool orc here, like named hero that is dangerous with strike, with 3 attacks. I think possibly with 3 wounds. It's been a while since I played him. Strike and a shield. I've got to have this guy. He can be, that's. I sort of rank the heroes from top rank to, down to the captains. And I would say he's a solid rank 2. He's not up there with Aragorn and Gandalf, but he's the rank below. I really like him. And Goroth, he's more of a mid-rank hero, but I really like his rules. He definitely adds something extra than a traditional orc captain. But both of them were really, really fun to paint, and really did sort of... I'd been very resistant, as I think way back at the beginning of the podcast I spoke about the Forge World models, and I do still have reservations about supporting it too much. I don't think it's the way the hobby should be going long term. I do think it's very gatekeeper and intimidating for people that are just getting in the hobby, that essentially you can't play a lot of armies in an optimum way without going for these very hyper expensive models from Forge World that use resin, which is, once you get used to it, it's fine, but is an extra challenge to a new hobbyist. Anyway, it did open my mind up. I'm not going to buy all of these. I'm not a massive supporter of it, but the models I do really like, I can get them, and it will bring me a lot of enjoyment in terms of painting them. They were great. So that's all the Mordor contingent, and then I did a couple of bat swarms because Razgush can bring them. I did a banner and a load of normal orcs, and then about 3 warg riders. That's another thing I should mention that I didn't mention on Haradim is I've done quite a lot of cavalry, which I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I had, I think as everybody did, quite a few Rohirrim riders. Not many of them painted because they were, a cavalry model takes a bit longer than doing an infantry model, doesn't it? And they just never quite seemed to get done. And when I was a kid, especially the metal cavalry, which back in the day, I mean, it's hard to think of anything other than just Rohirrim, Minister of Knights, and Warg Riders. I think those were the only plastic kits for cavalry. I know there's not too many more now, but at least at one time, those were the only plastic kits for cavalry, and the rest were sort of metal. And my budget just couldn't, as a kid, my pocket money couldn't stretch to having those metal riders. And being able to have quite a lot of cavalry now and quite a lot of metal cavalry models, which, by the way, are a bit of a nightmare hobby-wise, but that's a story for another time. That's been great wish fulfillment. I really love looking at all this Middle-earth cavalry that I've got. That has, I think, been a desire somewhere in me since I was about 11 years old. But anyway, that all in has left me with, a little over... Actually, I'm not sure if it's even a little, but maybe quite a bit over 100 models painted. I'll have to get a specific number at some point, but quite a bit over 100 models painted for Lord of the Rings over the course of the year. Which I know there will be those of you out there being like, oh, I wish I could get 100 models done. And I also know there will be some of you out there scoffing, being like, 100 models, that's nothing. But I think on these sort of things, set yourself an aim. If you want to get 5 models done spectacularly, that's good for you. If you want to get 1,000 models done to tabletop standard, that's good for you. And for me, I think the year before, I honestly got about 40 models painted across the whole year. I wasn't going at it as hard, admittedly, but I really wanted to increase the amount of models I can paint. And more so than that, I think I've developed my speed painting to a level that I'm happy with, and I'm getting a good standard whilst doing it quickly. And I really think the skills that I've learned in the last year are going to let me smash those numbers out of the park. I think it's quite realistic that I could wind up with something like 300 models painted this year, which will be great. I'm not somebody... It's a topic I want to talk about at some point, which is commission painting, because I find that an interesting topic. But we won't get into it. But I'm not somebody that personally uses commission painting. It is important to have a decent throughput for me, so that I can have more options on the tabletop, really. And some of those I'm not necessarily going to be taking to tournaments. Like at the moment, I don't really have any plans to take Mordor to tournaments, but I do really enjoy playing them in our private games. But anyway, I think I have spoken quite enough about my own hobby update. Let's move on to filling you in on Tom and Ash. Now, Tom, as you might recall, he originally started out with the Fellowship, which he got all of them done rather quickly, and then he's moved on to some allies of theirs, which I think makes sense because he can choose to use members of the Fellowship in that grouping if he wants to. And yeah, he's been doing the Elves of Rivendell, and then more recently, Warriors of the Last Alliance. And on his sort of hobby update, Tom is by far and away out of the three of us the most disciplined in terms of seeing a project through. And he has quite rapidly built himself up. Out of what I've seen, I would say, well, because of the heroes, admittedly, they do add quite a lot of points, but about maybe as much as 800 points of Rivendell elves. I think he's got about half a dozen of the knights done, and he's got another 6 to come. And last I heard, I think he was working on Glorfindel. And he's, that's right, because he ordered him from that awesome model from Forge World. And another bit that he's been working on the army is he's done these really, really good water-based bases, sort of sticking with that theme of, Elrond and Arwen are both able to do, is it the Wrath of the Brunnen? I'm not sure on the pronunciation of that. And yeah, just sticking with that theme. And he's been doing these really cool see-through resin bases that you may have seen, like retailers like Green Stuff World and things sell it. And really nice bases, really nice models. He's got some really nice crispy transitions on the cloaks of his elves that are sort of from dark blue to light blue, and there's sort of a little bit of purple in there and a little bit of sort of I will have to ask him whether he was doing a metallic undercoat, but to me, there's a little bit of a sparkle there, and it looks absolutely great. Tom, most disciplined out of the Middle-earth In Mercia gang as ever, has got quite a decent force going, and he's also got a decent contingent of Numenorians, and I know he's got a Isildur painted on foot and mounted. He's going to be looking to add them into games sometime soon. And then moving on to Ash, who... I'm sorry, Ash. This would be quite a good test to see whether you actually listen to this episode. But Ash is the most... how to put this? He finds finishing things the hardest out of the three of us. So maybe many of you will relate to that. I know I certainly have at certain points in sort of my hobby history. And he's really been struggling to get things done. He has basically at this point got all of his warriors on foot done, but I know he is looking to finish his Riders of Rohan. But I must say, I have played quite a few games with Ash. This was in 40k, where he has turned up and he's been like, this squad over here is a squad of Devastators, and I've looked over and there's some plain bases and 5 legs there. So this is leaps and bounds for him, and I do really recommend on doing all this stuff with friends, because it is a great motivator, and I can see in myself that I've managed to, I think Tom, like I say, I think he is able to slip into that motivation the easiest out of all of us. But for me, I do have to sort of turn it on. I do have to get into a rhythm. And having these deadlines of tournaments, I have spoken about, not setting yourself too harsh expectations when it comes to tournaments, because I have had a bad time with that in the past. But having the idea of in 3-4 months' time, I want to go to this tournament, so I'm going to try and get 2 models done a night, is really helpful. And then more so than that, well, not more so, but about the same, meeting up with your mates and being like, oh, I've got a game with the lads on Sunday. That is also a fantastic motivator. And then the fact, we have a cup of tea before we start playing, and we normally just spend 20 minutes looking at each other's models, having a bit of a chat at what we've been getting up to. If you do have friends local to you, I can't recommend it enough, sort of, tying your hobby goals together and motivating each other and really discussing your progress, discussing tips and stuff. I guess that's, part and parcel of what most mates do anyway. But I mean, if you're not somebody that's got friends that are interested in the hobby, try and share it with them. I'm sure some of them may have a vague interest, whether, they do something adjacent. Maybe they're interested in Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering, nerd adjacent. See if you can convert them, because it is so much fun having good close mates that you can share the hobby with. And if you can't achieve that, then yeah, as I've encouraged people to do before, get to the tournament scenes and let that be your motivator. Anyway, that has been a bit of a sidestep. Back to Ash. I've seen a real change in how many models he's getting done and a real fire brewing in him. And I'm really confident sometime extremely soon he's going to have a fully finished Rohan force. And they're looking good, like real good. For somebody that as I say, I think about 6 years or so, I sort of semi-seriously started getting back to this, and I've had 6 years to build my skills up again. For somebody that really only started properly painting as an adult 2 years ago, and he's not somebody that's interested in, Instagram painting, he's interested in tabletop, and the speed he's getting them done, they're looking awesome. I really think all three of these armies look great. We'll have to get some display boards sorted out for the tournament. See if we can pick up any of those best painted awards at the smaller places. I think at the bigger ones there are some commission painters and stuff. We perhaps can't compete with that. But yeah, to draw people's eye and spend a bit more time looking at the armies. And yeah, that's really the hobby roundup. I'm going to move on to how we've been getting on with games shortly. But one other thing I forgot that I spent some time on is doing freehand on my banners. I've really enjoyed that. I've done a really cool banner for Suladan. It's sort of twin snakes, and then I've got Eye of Sauron on the side. And I've been adding these like viper designs onto a lot of the banners, and sort of the crest thing that goes above their Harridan Raiders. I've been enjoying doing that. Freehanding, honestly, if you're lucky enough to have a reasonably steady hand, it's honestly not that bad. One trick I've sort of been working on is painting what I'm going to paint on it, but then also coming back and cutting in with solid black and neatening it up. You don't necessarily just need to do, the perfect snake and then just leave it. Cutting in or even starting it again and doing it several times. But yeah, I give it a go. So satisfying once you get it right. One thing I haven't mastered is between the different banners, getting consistency. I think that's going to take more practice. But yeah, that is a total roundup of sort of what we've been painting, what we've achieved over the year. And I think all three of us have done great. So I do hope you've had as successful a year in terms of army preparation and painting as we have. And moving on to the sort of the latest update, we had a mini tournament between myself, Chris, Tom and Ash. Now, I'm not going to give it the full treatment and go through everything because it was just sort of a practice tournament. And although we were taking it seriously, it was sort of relaxed. And you can read into it, not read into it. So I'm not going to go full through the army list. And there were only 4 of us. So obviously there's only so much we can test against. But to give you a quick rundown, Chris was running a Army of Helm Hammerhand list with lots of throwing spears, a captain, all on foot. And that was quite beastly. He was doing a lot of on-foot kiting. And then we had Ash playing an all-cavalry Riders of Theoden list centered around Theoden and Aemir. Then we had Tom, who was playing a Warriors of the Last Alliance list that sort of was about a 50-50 mix between elves and men of Numenor. And had a Isildur, Círdan, and a captain in it. And then I was running, and I will go into this more in depth very, very soon in future. My list, which was essentially about 39 warriors and heroes, Harridan total. I should mention that this was all run at 550 points. And I had Suladan, a chieftain, and Raza, 18 bows, about 5 cavalry, including Suladan. And it was a really, really good day. We managed to get a game in each against each of us. My dog behaved mostly. I had to give him a few bones to keep him quiet. And I wound up winning against Ash and Chris. And then I drew against Tom, which is quite a big moment in the group. I definitely don't think I should be winning every game. And I do think that, it's just my slight advantage on experience and a little bit psychological that I haven't lost yet. But this is the first game amongst the group. I have lost to Chris in the past, but not since we sort of started this journey a year ago. And it's the first game I haven't won against sort of the internal group. So that was a bit of a big moment of, things are changing. People's skills are moving on up. So well done on that, Tom. Tom unfortunately did lose his other 2 games, which brings us on to another topic of discussion, that Ash won 2 of his games. And Ash at this point had never won a game of Middle-earth strategy battle game. Unfortunately, we should have probably played some more scenario games, so that could have changed earlier. But well done to Ash, and was a total surprise. Not that Ash is a bad player, but I think he's got quite a high skilled list. It really punishes mistakes. And then, if I think correctly, that left Chris with a loss against me, a loss against Ash, and a win against Tom. Tom did get that draw, but I think he lost his other 2 games, which I think just goes to show how. It's not about list, because I think we would probably, looking at them all, expect the elves to do very well in our mini tournament, because he's got blinding light, he's got a reasonable amount of shooting, reasonable numbers considering he's got fight 5 on the table. But that was our sort of mini tournament. It was really good practice, really good to try out these lists that we're going to be using at a tournament soon. That coverage on that to follow. And it was a really good tester to stretch the legs on those lists. First time I think all of us had ever played those lists in sort of variations of it, but never played those actual lists. That is you guys completely up to date with our hobby sort of roundup. It's been a really good year. It's been so good. For the next year, I think there will probably be less Middle-earth hobby. I sort of need to finish doing the Mahud, and then I need to just add in some ring wraiths and a load of Morannons to my Mordor force. And then between the 3, I can sort of mix and match, and that's probably what I'm going to be playing for the whole of 2023. And I'm going to be using some of my painting time. I've recently got into Kill Team, which is a variant of Warhammer 40,000. I've been really enjoying that. We've had fun. I won't go into it too much because it's not the focus of this hobby, of this podcast anyway. I do also want to spend some time I'm not going to play Warhammer 40k at tournaments, but I love the models, and rumour has it 10th edition is coming, so I want to touch up some of my armies from that and get them ready for that when that releases, and continue playing Kill Team, which it's been really fun for me to learn a new format. I don't know if Kill Team is a game for you. I find it it's not similar, but it is similar in that it is very skirmish sort of orientated. So it does have that in common with Middle-earth. But overall, I'd just recommend trying out a different format, a format that you think would suit you. I found it such a breath of fresh air of just trying something completely new and starting from scratch. It is. And something that we can all play in a relaxed manner, because I think we're all getting to the stage now with Middle-earth where it's like, all right, we've learned how to play. Now we're going to have to spend a lifetime perfecting it. And that is one hobby. And yeah, to play something totally new, it's quite novel. So I definitely recommend trying out a different game mode than what you've recently been playing. But yeah, great year. Really excited at the start of season 2 to share with you what the plans are for 2023. It's going to be a great year, and I hope in a year's time when I do another roundup, it's going to be more models painted, more tournaments attended, more games lost to the guys, and more great memories and stories. But there we go.
Home is behind, the world ahead.
So now it's time to gather round and hear my story of Ardacon Singles. Now, last episode, you heard me talk about the doubles, and I gave my various reasons as to why that had been somewhat delayed. And all of that applies to this, but there is an extra element in that. I didn't have the greatest time at Ardacon Singles, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy it on the whole. I think I would have been more or less happy, calling it quits and having missed the whole thing. There were a couple of highlights. The first and last game were both great, and Chaos in Arda was also great. It comes down to all the reasons I mentioned last time, and then some stuff that I'm going to take you through now. And I will try and be brief, because I really think that on the whole, we're all about positivity in the hobby, and I don't think that there's too many of you that just want to sit around and listen to me moan. So I'm going to try and keep it light. I'm going to try and keep it brief. I'm going to touch on the things I didn't enjoy and why it meant I didn't enjoy them, and then we're going to move on and we're going to forget about this. So let's start on a high, really. Chaos in Arda, Friday night. It's about a 2-hour game. If you haven't played Chaos in Arda, essentially what it revolves around is it's something like 3 to 6 players gather around a table. You set a points amount. In this case, it was 400 points each. And essentially you draw cards every turn. There's some more rules to it, how many cards you draw, discarding, stuff like that. But you draw cards, and they give you objectives and things to achieve, and you score points by achieving those objectives that are on the cards. I really recommend this for, if you want to have a game with your friends that maybe you don't want to take too seriously, you don't want to have to focus too much, maybe you're going to be having a few drinks, maybe you've only got space for one table and you've got 3 or 4 of you. I really recommend it for that. It was great fun. I played with 3 really fun players. So we had on my table, we had Sean Lang, who was playing Road to Rivendell, which was all the Hobbits, Bill the Pony, and Aragon. Then we had Tom Turtle, Lurtz's Scouts. Like me, he was playing a mini army. I basically just played my doubles list, which I've taken you through before, 25 models. And his Lurtz's Scouts had Lurtz, Ugluk, and Malhir, which was 23 models. And then we had, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce this, but Andreas Summers, who was playing a Bears list, which was just Bjorn and Grimbeorn, which amazingly comes out at dead on 400 points. And to cut a long story short, we had a really good laugh. I think I could have maybe won this, but sort of halfway through the game, I had shot the heck out of one of the bears. I think he was dead, or he was very close to dying. I got some really lucky shots. The Fellowship were being slaughtered by Lurtz's Scouts. And I was just like, no, the men can stand this no longer. We are coming to save the hobbits. And I sort of threw my objectives away and I went over there and did my best to save the hobbits. I did not save the hobbits, but it was a valiant effort. nonetheless. And yeah, I think Tom wound up winning that. I did all right, and I think came second, but that's not really what the game was about. And yeah, it was a great laugh. Really recommend that game format if you can get hold of a set of the cards. And yeah, thank you. I didn't play any of these guys for the whole rest of the week. So yeah, thank you everyone for a great. I know it's a long belated thanks, but thanks everyone. I did really have a great time playing that on Friday night. So moving on to the singles, which starts on the Saturday morning. We had a really good night Friday night. I again perhaps overindulged slightly, but it wasn't too bad. I didn't wake up with a stinking hangover. I think I could have just done with a little bit more sleep. Now, because we're going to keep it brief, I'm not going to go through the minutiae of my list, but essentially it was Razdush, the new, well, not new anymore, but the orc hero who allows himself to take spiders and bats in his warband, Kardush Firecooler, and then Gorebag. And I essentially chose. I've veered between it was very bad and or maybe it had some elements that were all right. But I chose this list essentially because I wanted to play Razdush, as I thought it was cool. He could take the bats. I thought it was a cool model. I had just painted Kardush for Firecooler, so I wanted to play him. And then I thought Gorebag, he's got 3 might and he does have the ability to strike, so that's not a bad choice. He had a shield as well, and then basically a banner. In Razdush's warband, he had 2 bats and then sort of a 2/3 to 1/3 split of shields, with just normal orcs with shields, and then normal orcs with spears and shields. And then in the other warbands, just roughly the same sort of split, but with Morannons, and that's what made up the entire list. I think I did have a march in. No, I had a drum. That's what I did. I had a drum attached to Razdush's warband, and that was the army list really. And going into it, I was relatively happy because I had to make. I was borrowing the Morannons because I just realised I did not have time to properly finish a full singles list. So I did all 3 of my heroes and then the whole of Razdush's warband, and then borrowed all the Morannons. So the list was sort of made up of those 3 heroes. What I thought I could get painted. Oh, sorry, I did also have 3 Warg Riders that were in Razdush's warband, and I played 0 practice games with this list, which was also. This is going to be a bit of a lessons learned of if you want to do relatively well at a tournament. Like, if going at least 50% wins is an aim for you, there's a fair amount to learn from here. If you just want to turn up and you just want to play and you want to roll some dice, just ignore me entirely. But that's the perspective I'm giving it from. Yeah, so I did no practice games, and the list was very dependent on what I could get hold of. I could have done it a little bit differently, and I really wish I had done it differently, because I had lots of elements in this list of stuff I just had never played before, like Kardush Firecooler. I have since learned he can be a really, really good hero for 60 points to have in your army, but I'd never used the guy before, so it took me the 6 games to really sort of cotton on to how I should be using him. Razdush is like fairly straight down the line, so I was making the most out of him, and I did, to be honest, make the most out of the bats. But yeah, that was sort of where it fell down really. I really went for like a Horde Mordor list, which again isn't. I've played Mordor for a lot of years outside of tournaments, but it's just not really how I typically play. I normally build things around a Mordor Troll Chieftain, to be honest. Playing Chieftains is like a major staple of my Mordor list, and I wish I had maybe built a list around that and perhaps had Kardush and Razdush, left out Gorebag. and drop some numbers, and I think I could have been a lot more successful. Probably not wildly more successful, because I still would have been quite unfamiliar playing tournament-style games with it. Moving on to the tournament itself. The first game started out rather well in terms of, enjoyment, not well in terms of result. I was playing against a chap called Tommy Griffith, who I believe is part of the Guardians of Wiltshire team. And he was a really good lad. He was playing a Serpent Horde list, which was just much after my own heart. And I have to admit, I just spent the entire game thinking, damn, I wish I was playing that list. That's so more my speed. And on that game one, it just sort of straight away made me realise I hadn't really taken a list that perfectly suited me. But anyway, he had a great list that is quite typical of some of the stuff I've taken since, which was Suladan. He was playing a Harashin and then Raza. Lots of bows, lots of the Fight For troops. We were playing Dominion, and it was quite a hard fought game, really. So this was Dominion, which was over the objectives, and I cannot recall the points totals, and unfortunately Tawny doesn't seem to be displaying them anymore. But I think I lost by something like, it was fairly close, 1 point or something, 1 or 2 points, and I managed to get my oath, which is a whole different system, but it's not too relevant to this story. But essentially at some tournaments they have an extra mechanism that at Ardacon, it allows it to, if you get your oath and you lose, it's a minor loss. If you get your oath and you win, it's a major victory, and that's essentially what it does. It gives you an extra victory point for doing that minor major, and I wound up with a minor loss because I had my oath, but I lost on victory points. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't bring you the exact numbers. But yeah, that was a good game against Tommy. I thought he played it exactly as I would. He had lots of bows and stuff. He was just, as I say, very similar to the kind of lists I play. Lots of bows, lots of Fight For, lots of might. And I had my moments. I flash killed his Harashin using bats and Razgush. But yeah, he protected Suladan well. He didn't put Raza in any exposed positions. Used his Fight For when the lines came together well. I just couldn't really break through. I think I tried to get through to Suladan at one point with my bats when he left him slightly exposed. Didn't come off. Just couldn't get that extra objective off him, and he I think I recall I was quite lucky to get the result I did, because I had 2 Warg Riders that if they had ran off the objectives I had them holding on because I was broken, then that would have been me with like next to no victory points. But yeah, had a really good game against Tommy. Again, long late, but thanks Tommy for that game. But yeah, I just walked away from the table being like, I wish I had found the time to get another 250 points of Serpent Horde done so I could be playing Serpent Horde for my singles, which it does lead me on to, the story that we're going to tell in 2023. Which leads me on to game 2, which was Raconteur. Not one of my favourite scenarios. You can listen to other podcast episodes where I've gone through scenarios in detail, but Raconteur essentially is get more models off your opponent's board edge than he gets off yours. I took this was against a chap called Ian Porter. He was really fun to play against. Also, it was a good game really, but I had my back up against it immediately. I had gone for a Horde list, and essentially Ian had brought a list that was Horde better. So I had 42 model count. He had a staggering 59. Which for Raconteur just makes things very difficult. I took an initial early lead by running my Warg Riders up there. I dismounted, 2 of the Wargs didn't run off, and then I basically got 5 off, and that was all I got off for the whole of the game. I did, admittedly, I deployed rather poorly, and I wound up having to quickly try and drum to the other side of the table, which certainly made things harder for myself. But yeah, there was too many really. I think Ian wound up getting something like 9 or 10 off. It was a good, enjoyable game, but really towards the end of this game, as I've mentioned before, sort of my post-COVID recovery and the heat, it was really starting to get to me. But no, it was a great game, well played. A combination of, I do think that the 2 army lists for the scenario had me at a slight disadvantage, but not to take away from Ian, he played very well, very sporting. It was quite funny because it was like a real sort of mirror of my list in some ways, in that basically he didn't have like Razdush or the bats, but he had Kardush, he had Gorbag as well, and then he had Gorishnak and a generic orc captain, and then just lots of orcs, and that list certainly made it quite difficult for me. I was feeling a little bit deflated. I think just because of the stuff I've mentioned earlier, not feeling my best in that environment. 2 losses on the trot was getting to me a little bit. But no, Ian was a great opponent, and Now moving on to game 3, I'm not going to name check my opponent on this one, because I'm not going to mince my words on this. This is categorically the worst tournament game I have ever played in Middle-earth strategy battle game, and probably the worst in terms of enjoyment war game I have ever played as an adult. And it was this game that really sort of ruined singles for me. I think if it wasn't for the other stuff, as I've been through, not feeling it myself, I think I might have been able to shrug it off. But I'm going to explain why I didn't enjoy this so much, and why, to be honest, it did totally ruin the weekend for me. After this, at the bar afterwards, I just felt like going home. I didn't really care about Sunday. I knew I wasn't going to get a reasonable place in, and it just put me in a funk. I wanted to go home, see my girlfriend and dog, forget about it. It's not that important, and come to a new tournament another day. It really left me deflated and disappointed. So this was against a Gondor list, which was led by Boromir, captain of the White Tower. Warband 2 was Ingold, and then 2 Avenger bolt throwers. Lots of Fountain Court. How many? 17 of them with shields. Fountain Court everywhere. Citadel Guard with a longbow. 2 Rangers of Gondor. Another 4 Rangers of Gondor. So basically the ability to get up to lots of fight 5 and lots of high defense on the Fountain Court Guard. And it's not the list that spoiled it. I was like, 2 Avenger bolt throwers, come on, man. But I think that there is a split amongst the community about what is the acceptable amount of siege equipment to bring. But when I initially saw that, I was like, who is this? Who's this going to be against if this is the list they're bringing? But all seemed all right at first. Things were quite civil, and it was the game mode was Command the Battlefield, which is where essentially it is Maelstrom deployment, which obviously was advantageous with there being 2 Avenger bolt throwers, and there's a dead zone in the center of the battlefield, and you need to have the most models in the 4 remaining quadrants. And he got very lucky in his rolls and was able to deploy everything just together in the center of one board edge. So I was like, all right, well, that's not great. I did my Maelstrom. I managed to get 2 warbands together, and then the third, I didn't have it in a bad place, but I had to start further away. So a bit of a disadvantage there. And then I decided that it was best to basically go the short way, and I would be funneled and restricted down this walkway. But it was better than going the long way and spending several turns being shot at by the Avenger bolt throwers. And then it just, it was, from then on, it wasn't a terribly satisfying game because it was just the two battle lines just grinding against each other, really. And it was a long back and forth. And it started off, at this point, game 3, I was like, people kept commenting like, "Are you all right?" Because I was really not feeling myself. And it started off like, I think like once or twice, I forgot to do, because you're meant to do Cardouche's suck the orc thing and get his wool back immediately, I think before you roll for priority. And a couple of times priority came a little bit quickly, and I wound up being like, "Oh, I haven't done that. Can I do that?" My opponent allowed me, and we'll come back to that later. And yeah, I as with all of my opponents, I pretty much said to everybody, "Look, this is my first tournament, so if I am making any mistakes, or not like gameplay mistakes, but doing things wrong, feel free to point it out to me." And also, I mentioned earlier, this was the first time I had ever used Cardouche, and that will come up in a bit. And we get to a point, we are a bit of a stalemate, but I've managed to send some orcs round. I've taken out the Avenger bolt throwers, they're out of the equation, and I've managed to send some orcs around, and I'm starting to get the better of Gondor. I've brought Cardouche up, and it was an important turn, basically. Boromir was a bit exposed, and I said, "Oh, I've forgotten to suck the orc." And it became, that's terrible phrasing, I know, and it became evident that it was quite important this turn. Bear in mind, nothing had been moved yet, just, the priority dice had been rolled. And I 100% get that, this is the letter of the rules and it's my own fault. But this was the first sort of thing of, I was doing this every single turn, so I was going to continue to do this every single turn. But the other player is within their rights to deny it. But because it was evident this was going to be an important round, it was like, no, you can't do it. It's too late this turn. And yeah, my advice on that is, I would say in general, don't accept, on things like that, don't accept the generosity of your opponent. I think you're better off getting burned early on and learning your lesson. Like, write it down on a piece of paper. I was I don't want to give myself a get out of jail free card, but I was really struggling to remember on that, because it was a new thing to me and I wasn't feeling myself. That was the first indicator of, maybe this sportsmanship I've seen earlier on in the game isn't as sincere as it initially felt, because it's just me. But having done it the other turns before, I would have continued to do it. I would have probably allowed it. But that's all above board still. I'm just saying, I was like, that's probably not me voting for this chap for sporting. But there we go. We've both lost 2 games at this point. I'm just saying, if you had won all your games, 100%, you're denying that. You're playing for the top tables. But there we go. Anyway, we move along. And I decide anyway that I'm still going to go ahead with Cardouche, and I'm going to use up all his will, and that I don't care about turning Fury off, because I wasn't really using it at that time. And I successfully strike Boromir, and this is after I've already charged him, and I've charged him with Razdush. Razgush, my leader, I've charged him with Gorbag, and I've now struck him with the fireball with Cardouche. And yeah, it strikes the whole model, so he was able to resist it, but I rolled a 6 and he failed to resist it. Then I killed the horse, and I killed the horse. I did a wound on Boromir, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that. And then he also rolled a 1 on the Throne Rider. And I think at this point he was out of might. So this is like, Boromir is in real trouble here. He's down to possibly 2 wounds, if I'm remembering correctly, and no might. And then the chap says to me, "Oh, well, I can take him out of combat. He doesn't need to. You've charged him with those 3 there, but because he's on a smaller base now, he doesn't need to fight Razgush and Gorbag. He could just fight the warrior, because he's on a smaller base now, and I can choose that." And I was like, hang on, this doesn't seem right. And we did try to summon a TO, and this is one of the things I did mention about Ardacon, in that I do think they need TOs, because it was hard at times. And we were waiting about 10 minutes, and the guy was like, "Look, I've been fair to you. I promise you, this is the way it is." And he was like, "But I can let you take it back." And this should have been waving red flags right in front of my eyes. But at this point, I still thought the guy was on the level. He was like, "I can let you take it back, and then that way you can still fight him, but his horse will be alive." And I was feeling truly dreadful. My enjoyment of the game was waning. The importance of the game was waning, and I think I'm most annoyed with myself rather than the other player's conduct. I said yes, and I did it, and it then took me. Fortunately, it didn't really bite me in the butt in terms of losing troops, but it meant Boromir stayed alive for 2 more turns. I should mention that I had might available for striking. That's why I was fairly confident I could do him some real trouble. Yeah, Boromir stayed alive for 2 more turns. And when Boromir died, that battle line just completely fell apart. And it would have happened 2 turns earlier, which would have completely changed the game. And yeah, when I got to the bar later on, I was talking to some of the more experienced players. They knew who he was. They knew how many tournaments he'd been to, and everybody categorically said to me, "He's Adjutor. There's no way he thinks that is the correct ruling on that. And if he did, he would have known to get a TO." And yeah, that really just did it for me. And it's a combination of everything. On a good day, feeling myself, I would have just been like, I swear, I've got to keep the podcast clean because I declare it as clean. But, swear aloud loudly, got a pint and moved on with it. But the way I was feeling, it completely deflated me. And unfortunately, the game does get a bit worse. So we'll skip ahead to the end. I've really started to massacre him at this point, and he's not got that many troops on there. I've got a Warg Rider in one of the segments. I've got another segment where I've clearly got more. He's got one where he clearly controls it. And then in the third one, in the fourth one even, it was very much in question who actually controlled it. We were talking, we either had the same, or one of us had what by one, or one of us the other way had by one. And a few things happened here. I'm just almost falling apart in terms of how I feel at this point. I want nothing more than to go outside and be in the cool air. And I'm totally frazzled, and I'm sat there with this Warg Rider, and I'm debating where to put him. And the guy just says to me, look, it doesn't matter, man. He counts. You've got that segment. You're hidden. I can't get to you. Do you mind if we just move on? And I was still feeling goodwill to the chap. And I was like, okay. And again, I really regret it. Because when we came to counting up who had what segment, he immediately got the tape measure out and went, "You're within 12." Like, he knew when I moved my hand off the model, I was within 12 inches of the centre, so it didn't count. So I lost that entire segment. But then I had also broken him, and he hadn't broken me, and I'd killed his leader. I can't remember exactly how the pointings were, but I was still in the playing. And it's like, okay, you've got that segment, he's got that segment. We get to the third one, and essentially, if you're halfway in a sector, you have to be entirely in. And he had, honestly, like 2 guys that were right on the line. And he just picked them up without measuring them and was like, oh, they were in that thing. And that led to him having 1 more in that sector. And yeah, again, I spoke to some more experienced players afterwards, and they said, if you hadn't measured it and he picked it up off the table, that don't count. If it was in doubt, if you said, no, that's in doubt, we haven't measured them, and you've picked them up, then it wouldn't have counted. And it was, as I say, him picking up those 2 models, like, even if one of them had been in doubt, it would have been a tie on that sector, which would have been very important to the outcome of the game. I think if both were out, I would have won. If one was in, was out, then it would have been a draw, despite the muck up on the other sector. And yeah, together with everything else, sat there at the bar afterwards, I was like, that's been done deliberately, hasn't it? Yeah, because I am, quite a straight down the line guy normally, and I'm not afraid to tell people when I think they're doing wrong, as nobody should be afraid to say to me if they think I've done something slightly wrong or they want to question something. It goes both ways. But normally being like that and having felt so not by myself, because it was even worse on singles how I was feeling, and the heat was even worse. I just felt like a mug. I really did. And yeah, I don't think you should let games get to you this much, but I'm just describing the specific circumstance. And I wound up losing by like 1 victory point. And after having been hammered at the beginning, come back, murdered Boromir, broken the other army, I just felt completely robbed. 3 losses. The others were against good opponents, but that's how I felt. And hopefully it's been long enough since the tournament that no one can identify this chap, because a witch hunt or spreading a bad reputation isn't what I want. There are 2 sides to every story, but I don't think anything could be said to me to change my mind on what went on in that game. Now, on to day 2 of the singles, and I'm happy to report nothing anywhere near as negative as that. As I say, I think that was my worst experience in wargaming ever, to be honest. I mean, I definitely shouldn't have taken it so much to heart, and I definitely shouldn't have let it ruin my weekend. It was just the other factors. But, let me know your thoughts on that. Do you think I've got the wrong end of the stick? I think those instances I've pointed out there are fairly clear cut, and all 3 of them together, very questionable as to what his motives were. And especially with 2 losses, I don't get the point. But there we go. Anyway, moving on to day 2, round 4. It was a clash by moonlight, and I was playing a chap called Fabian. I'm sorry, Fabian, I'm not going to pronounce your second name. Who had come across with his brother from Germany, I believe it was. Great guy. He was really, fun. I enjoyed his. Oh no, actually, sorry. This was the final game of Saturday. They did 4 and then 2. That was how the split was. Because I remember Fabian really he had not had a good time of it, and he really wanted to get off to go see the town with his girlfriend and his brother. And he was basically playing a Depths of Moria list, and he admitted himself it wasn't the best list, and the Clash by Moonlight certainly wasn't a great scenario for him. He only had 26 models. I got, the long and short of it was, I got some really lucky rolls with the bat swarms. Kept on charging them into the kept on charging the bats into the Balrog. I just kept on passing those morale checks that I needed to get into him. Was sapping his fight skill then, and I took something like 6 wounds off the Balrog. I was hoping to kill it, but I didn't quite manage it. And then I just, while that was all going on, with the remainder of my troops, I just absolutely slaughtered his goblins and won the game pretty decisively. I think we both really just wanted it to end, which although it was a victory, we both wanted to get out of there really, and we were both happy that we were playing against decent people. And yeah, it's a shame, like Fabian self-admitted that he didn't have the best list, and it's a shame we couldn't have made a tighter game out of it. But it was the first time I'd ever played the Balrog, so was positives there. Thanks, Fabian. I hope you enjoyed your trip to the UK and Ardacon. Hopefully you have better luck at it next year, because from what you said, you do come to Ardacon every year. Now, Game 5 was Retrieval, which is a bit similar to Defend the Camp, apart from there's an object in there, and you've got to get it back to your sort of camp area. And this was against Thomas Harrison of SBG magazine, as many of you may be aware. I think being as White Dwarf doesn't really do Lord of the Rings coverage anymore, the biggest printed coverage of the game. He was such a nice guy. I can't remember who I voted for Sporting, but it was almost certainly him. He was a really top bloke. And yeah, he was playing Pits of Dol Guldur, had Azog on White Warg fully kitted out, He had the Keeper of Dungeons and then a Hunter Orc. Lots of Gundabad Orcs, lots of Hunter Orcs. And really, in this sort of scenario where there was one clear objective that we had to get to, I sort of played some games with my bats and my wargs of trying to get round him to try and get to his stuff, which did pull off some of his troops. But honestly, I just did not have an answer for Azog in my list. I knew if he got hold of Razgush, I was probably going to lose that, especially while he was still on Warg. I didn't have any bows to deal with him from afar, so I tried to get the bats in there, but I think he's also terrifying, and Thomas was doing a rather good job of making sure I couldn't get the bats in around there, and I just didn't have an answer. And really, he managed to get my item, but he couldn't get it back. And he broke me. It was just an absolute hammering, to be honest. I'm glad it was against him, though. Really nice bloke. Went and chatted to him about the magazine afterwards and actually bought an issue. I think I might actually do a mini review of that at some point. But yeah, not much to be said there. I didn't have an army that I knew how to use well enough to deal with this, and I can't really make any excuses about being tired or anything, because this was the first game of the day, so I was more refreshed. But yeah, he slapped me up and down the table, being honest. But yeah, thanks, Thomas. I enjoyed the game against you in terms of the sportsmanship, but I think I probably enjoyed the chat afterwards more. Hopefully you got some enjoyment out of it, mate. But yeah, thank you for that. Now, on to the sixth and final game. This was a game of Fog of War against a chap called George Bulkwill. Now, he was playing an Erebor list that was led by Dane, King Under the Mountain, 12 Iron Hills warriors with shield and spear, Beefer with 11 Iron warriors with shield and spear, 1 Iron Hills warrior with shield, a captain on goat, and then 6 Iron Hills warriors with crossbow and spear. Now, as you may be aware, that this one actually has banner points, and he does not have a banner in his list. So I could have just I could have ran away from the whole game, but I thought that wouldn't be fun. Sixth game, I've lost 4. Might as well go for it. So I just marched straight at him with my drum, banging the drum and get into him as quickly as possible. And this was actually, considering how everything else went, well, not everything else. We had that one negative experience, and then, the rest was either a foregone conclusion in terms of my win, or I've been through it. But this was a real high point. I had a great game against George. He was really giving me what for, but I wound up winning this game, and I'm really proud of this win, because I think it was a combination of, I had finally got some experience under my belt with this list. I played 5 games with it, and his list should have been a very strong opponent for mine. He's got that fight 7, so my strength 4 means nothing, and he's got strength 4 everywhere, so my Morannons are going down a heck of a lot easier than they would do normally. And I did, we basically got involved. I managed to take down his captain. I managed to kill quite a few dwarves, but I didn't get near. I didn't get near breaking him. I managed to do a few tricks that I'd picked up over the weekend with Kardouche, but ultimately I saw he was going to start to break me, so I started trying to survive and started withdrawing a bit with my banner. He did his best to break through with Dane to get to my banner, and it just wasn't quite enough, and I think he wound up not breaking me by 1 or 2 models, which was lucky for me. But yeah, I wound up winning this game by 1 victory point, and it was a ray of hope in otherwise a weekend which, to be honest, the experience was good. It was good to have some harsh lessons there, which I'm not going to repeat those mistakes again. But there's a part of me that would have skipped the weekend if I'm being truthful. But there you have it. That's why I've sort of delayed going through this, because I didn't want to sit here and, just complain. But actually, having gone through it, maybe there's some worthwhile stuff in there for you guys, especially you junior players. If you're feeling unwell at a tournament and there's nothing to be done about it, then just, write the tournament off in the back of your mind, because you're going to be making mistakes. Don't give yourself such a hard time as I did. If somebody is doing something questionable at the table, and I'm not talking about, not letting Kardouche suck the will out of an orc, that was on the level. But the other stuff, call the TO. If you care about the result of the game, some people don't. Some people are there just to roll dice, but I'm not one of those people. But if you're like me, care about the result of the game, call the TO over. I don't care if it takes 25 minutes to get the TO. If it's important and you need to know the answer, call the TO over, and all of my stuff would have been resolved. Even like counting up the stuff at the end, I could have said he's not measured that, and he's picked it up, and now we don't know where it was. And yeah, maybe the TO would have been like, well, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because, he's not had any problems. I don't know how they make those decisions. Maybe it would have gone against me, but I wouldn't be sat here. I wouldn't have been, I don't sit around wondering about it now, but at the time, I wouldn't have been sat in the bar that evening feeling pretty crappy. But there you have it. But yeah, I think it was just an unlucky combination of it all that spoiled singles. But there you have it. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not going to carry this with me. I'm glad in some ways that I've got this recording done, because it can be an end to it. I can wash my hands of that experience. And, onwards and upwards. It's been some time ago now, so there's no point dwelling on it any further. I would like to know your views, though, if you've got any thoughts on maybe, did I misinterpret it, or do you think I got it spot on about that guy's intentions? But yeah, that was Ardacon Singles.
And there are many paths to tread through shadow to the edge of night.
So on to the news segment of the podcast, where we discuss new releases, notable events, and just things that really have caught my eye to do with the Middle-earth hobby sphere that I think you might be interested in. And first on the agenda to discuss is the launching of the 2023 Great British Hobbit League. I don't know if any of you have seen or not, but obviously the GBHL was one of the torchbearers of the hobby when it was, more or less not being supported by Games Workshop. And from my understanding, although I wasn't directly involved at the time, it's many of the individuals involved with the league that really kept the game alive and well, and sort of drove the idea that this could be successful for Games Workshop in a commercial capacity once again. And if you go onto their website, if you just go on Google, search Great British Hobbit League, or go on Facebook, you can find their details and find their events calendar. And at least to my eyes, it looks like their events and their tournaments calendar is busier than ever. And I have been keeping quite a close eye on it, because I will go into it more next episode why it is of interest to me. But I have been keeping a keen eye on it. One thing I would note is look at it regularly, because some of the tournament organisers do seem to get it added to the calendar as well as their sort of event page added rather early, and some of them do seem to get it added at times only a week or less before the actual tournament tickets go on sale. So definitely check that out if you're interested in the tournament scene. As yet, I have yet to attend a GBHL event, but that is definitely something I will be looking to tick off in 2023. So that would be great to see some of you there. The second and final topic I wanted to discuss in this segment of the podcast is the unfortunate announcement over on Warhammer community of Games Workshop price increases. As ever seems to be the case of late, these price increases do seem to be coming regularly now, every single year. And of course, we have seen some stealth increases which haven't been announced. Mummock War Leader, I'm looking at you. That was a crazy increase of something like 40%. But anyway, back to these increases. I'm going to just read this straight from the Warhammer community site. Essentially, they're looking at doing an average increase of 6%. This means that, for instance, a Warhammer 40k squad set, the example that's given is Battle Sisters, will raise £1.50. So if it was £36, it would move to £37.50. And they say that plastic miniatures are going to change. Forge World and Citadel resin miniatures are going to change. Standard and Artificer Citadel brushes are going to change, and so are spray paints. They explicitly state that starter sets, paint pots, Citadel tools, codexes, rulebooks, battle tomes, and synthetic STC brushes will remain the same. So yeah, just really this podcast should air ahead of the change coming in on the 6th of March. So if you were not aware, and you were, something you were thinking of purchasing is in that list, specifically resin models, both Forge World and Citadel, and the plastic miniatures. That is a large amount of the Middle-earth range. If you were planning on having them on your hobby slate, probably for the rest of the year, it is worth making those purchases a little bit early and saving yourself 6% or more, because 6%, remember, is going to be the average. So now, I was just going to take a moment really to talk about those increases. And I think it's the same for everyone, that I feel it's a bit disappointing, really. I can understand that obviously we live in a capitalist society. There is a thing called inflation. Games Workshop didn't invent it. It does feel rather unfair each year that things get more expensive and we're just expected to go fight with our employers for a little bit more. Or if you're self-employed, you're in an even worse situation that you need to increase your revenue each year and see that growth that, Games Workshop themselves here, that's what they're chasing with these increases. But while I am sympathetic to the business case, I am interested to see how this is rolled out, because they do seem to have phrased it just as an across-the-board plastic miniatures getting more expensive. Hopefully it excludes those new battle boxes that they brought out, the starter sets, the Minister of the Mordor, because they do say that starter sets are excluded, and that would be great if they are. But an across-the-board increase in pricing on plastic miniatures, I mean, I don't know about you, but I struggle to believe that they really need to increase the prices on, for instance, standard Mordor orcs. Those models have literally at this point, will it be this year? 20 year this year or next year? 20 years since the release of Return of the King, and those would have come out, I think, just before or just after. All those original line plastics. I think maybe there's a bit more of an argument for like the Hobbit era stuff, but let's focus on the easy win in terms of the argument for us. Those kits that are 20 years old or older, or at least approaching it, the design costs of those models are long since paid off. The people that design them don't even work at Games Workshop anymore. It honestly, it just feels like price gouging a bit there. I've been told in the past by people that sort of work in the sector that typically the printing of a colour box for an established line that has paid off its tool is more expensive than the plastic within. And that is the reason why many of the Lord of the Rings range just comes in generic boxes with a sticker on it, because that's the cheapest way they can do that. And I would appeal to Games Workshop to just have a think about this. I get stuff that's come out last year. You're still paying off the tooling. You're still paying off the investment of the design costs. I get that, like, your money isn't going as far as it once was, but I think increasing, like, well, the Harrod Warriors that I've bought a set of in the last year, they are not great, and I've purely bought them because I want to support Games Workshop. I do like the quaintness of the sculpt, but mainly I want to be part of the game and I want to support the game. And I just think that, if they apply this 6% increase and then they do it next year and maybe the year after, it is not going to be long until we're looking at above £30 for those original plastic sets. And I don't think that's justified. The quality's not there. If you're going to charge us modern prices, give us modern models, Games Workshop. That's what I would say. I think we've seen with those, like, I forget what they're called, the battle hosts, the start collecting sets, that what they can do in terms of price when they bundle things together, and then also when you buy it from a local game store, you can genuinely get value for money. They can sell this stuff at value for money prices. And I already don't think those kits by themselves are value for money. And it's going to put people off, for sure. And especially the ranges that aren't supported by those starter sets. To new players, I can't imagine saying to a new player after these price increases come in, advising them to take up an army as their first army that's not one of those ones supported by a starter set or something like that. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. And yeah, everything I've said there just really also doubly applies to Citadel resin miniatures. The ones I've had have varied between this is a heck of a lot of cleanup to this model is just straight up trash. If I didn't need it for my army, I would get rid of it. I don't like it and I didn't enjoy painting it. The Forge World models, as I've actually spoken about in this episode, very good quality, but we're already talking £24 for 2 models. And there's a lot of those models that are required for armies. A 6% increase on them is only going to be a little over £1. But yeah, taking it to £25, these price increases are going to keep coming. How much are they going to charge just for 2 models that are required to make some armies functional? But yeah, not a good thing. For me, I understand that they got to raise prices on some things. They've got to cover increased costs. While pursuing growth themselves. That they're not doing this as a charity. They are a company. But across the board, really, yeah, I think they need to take a second look at this. I'm not going to go into the 3D printer argument. I'm some people are war gamers, some people are war gamers and 3D printers, and some people are Games Workshop game enthusiasts. And some of you may dislike me for it, but I fall very much into that latter category. I'm not interested in getting into the manufacture of my miniatures. I want to spend all of my time making, as in assembling, painting, and playing the miniatures. So I'm until the cost becomes so prohibitive that I can't afford it, then it's not really an option for me. But we'll save that conversation for another day. I know many of you are very passionate about 3D printers, and it is a topic I want to talk about at some point, because I although I'm not interested in doing it myself, I have made use of 3D printer companies, whether it's getting extra spears or extra bows. And there's something I've got in mind, but I'm going to save that for another day. But yeah, we'll save that topic. But yeah, let me know what you think of the pricing increases. Is this 6% something that concerns you? Is it something that concerns you in 5 years' time? Or have you already been priced out of the hobby? I would genuinely hate to hear that there were people that the last few years of increases, it's meant that they genuinely can't afford it. there are ways around it, but I understand that some people budgets are very, very tight, especially with things the way they are in most places, really. But yeah, that's been the news. So, ladies and gentlemen, elves, dwarves, and halflings, and all other mystical races that may be listening, there we have it. That is the first year of Middle-earth in Mercia. That is the end of what will hopefully be book one in a very long mythology of my experiences in the tournament playing world of the Middle-earth strategy battle game. And what a year it's been. I think it is fairly easy for me to say that in terms of hobby, this has been the best year in my hobby life. I have had so much fun. I have played more war games, the majority of which have been Middle-earth games in the last 12 months than I have in any other 12-month period in my life. I've painted more models. I've attended my first tournaments. I've been to Games Workshop official events at Warhammer World. I've made new friends. I've spent probably too much on a custom dice bag and dice. It has been awesome. I have had so much fun, and thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart to everybody that has come along on this journey, or who may pick up this journey as time goes on and be able to take something from it. It has really been the icing on top of what would have been a great year even without the podcast, but just the extra experience of basically using the podcast as a blog of this story. And I mean, it's been a long run, really, from, having an initial conversation of like, oh, we could do this, we could give this a go with Chris, and then, the original plans not quite going to plan, and making new friends there, and then the validation of getting that 3-3 finish on in the doubles at Ardacon. It's just been really great. I've had so much fun, and yeah, I think it really shines a light on this kind of stuff. That those of us who do get to do these sort of things, how lucky we are to, live in the privileged position we do, that we can spend so much time, money, and effort on our little toy soldiers. And yeah, it's really been great. I just putting more effort into it has allowed me, the things that I love about wargaming, it's allowed those elements to be multiplied, like the social element of it, the challenge of it, the learning progression element of it, which is so multifaceted, because you've got the game itself, which has many phases, and then you've got the painting, the modeling, the planning, and yeah, going back to, I think I'm repeating myself, but the social side of it has just been really great, both meeting new people, going out to the tournament scene and being like, wow, like there is actually a proper grown-up cohort who support this game, and it is more important to them to have a sportsman-like game that everybody enjoys than it is to come away with a victory that's been undermined because you've played in an underhand manner, which I'm sure those of you who were teenagers and played the game and went to war games clubs, for me it was Warhammer 40k, I had a lot of experiences like that, and I think it was, hesitations around that sort of thing that did initially put me off taking the step from, let's take the game from home out into the big world, really. But no, I've not regretted it for a second, and now, I guess, really, we've done a pretty solid roundup of what 2022 has been and what we've achieved, and what we've achieved here at Middle-earth In Mercia with all of your support. And we are a small podcast that's trying to grow, but every single letter or message of encouragement is so fondly received over here. I really, really do appreciate it. And everybody that's liked the Facebook page, and I know that the numbers for correspondence and likes is far less, but I can see there's a lot of you that do listen. So we're going to keep, as long as I keep enjoying this, as long as people keep listening, it's going to keep happening, I'm afraid. So you're just going to have to put up with it. But that is 2022 done and dusted. I know it's a bit weird that I'm finishing up 2022 in February, but there we go. So in 2023, which I think the future is the only way really to look now, what are we going to be doing? And really, it's going to be more of the same, but obviously there is going to be a different angle for it in the second year. We're going to be moving from being complete novice to our second year, where I'm going to be looking to develop in the game. I think I have spoken in the last podcast of my desire of all right, I have the basics of the game, I have the basics of list building. Now I want to build and develop on that and start improving as a player. And I don't want to go on about it too much in this episode, because it is really going to be the launching point of the first episode for the next season, really. But yeah, so there is obviously going to be that change in perspective, because we are moving from year 1 to year 2, and I've spoken in the past about my desire really moving forward that, okay, we've got the basics, we know what it's like to go to a tournament, we know what it's like to prepare an army, we know what it's like to make a army list that suits us as a player, so let's move on and develop. And that's what year 2 is going to be about. And I will elaborate that on that more in the first episode of season 2, because that's really going to be our launching point of sort of how we're thinking. There's also going to this episode is the first episode that I have edited in a different manner. It'd be interesting to see if we get any feedback to that. It is how I've done this one is certainly reducing the time of production, and hopefully that means more episodes for you all. But I don't want to see a significant drop in quality. So I guess if I get lots of emails saying it's a terrible change, then we'll have a second look at it. And between now and the first episode of season 2, I'm going to just have a little bit of a think about the format and make sure that things are a little bit more consistent between the episodes. And I think, a few of the episodes, I've been happy with everything we've produced, but a few of the episodes I've perhaps sat down and just done it. And I think just taking 10 minutes to just write out what I want to go through could have probably saved me more time in the editing. So yeah, to be honest, you probably won't notice a change on that. Most of the things I'm doing are just to try and cut down the editing process on my end, really. We're still going to have the same sort of segments that we've had to the podcast. We're going to have the introduction, we're going to have the correspondence, we're going to have a main feature, we're going to have the news, and then we're going to talk about the closeout and what's coming up next time. And then everything else, sort of the other things we've done, the hobby interviews, battle reports, and that kind of thing, is as and when the opportunity arises and we've got time in an episode to put it in. As I say, more of the same, really, but just moving forward with the story. We're moving from the Fellowship of the Ring into Two Towers, and like I say, I can't give too much away because I really want to go through it in detail in episode 1 of season 2, which I hope you will join me for. That episode should actually follow up, considering some of my release times previously, quite fast after this one. So if you've enjoyed season 1, the best way you can support the podcast is to give us a subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. If you have the time, I would appreciate it if you're able to give us a favourable review, or if you have not enjoyed it, a merciful review. Give us a like on our Facebook page. And if you are interested in any of the topics I've spoken about today, whether that is the Games Workshop price increases, maybe you have an opinion on my experience at Ardacon, please do write to us. I would love to hear from you, and we'll read it out on the next or following episode. Our email address is middleearthinmercia@gmail.com. That is middleearthinmercia@gmail.com. And if you're in any doubt how that is spelt, it is in the About section attached to every podcast upon release. Now I've got the formalities out of the way, that's all I have for you today. As always, it's been great fun on my end chatting to you. I can't wait for the start of season 2. So join us next time for the first episode of the new season, where I will reveal where the adventure takes